they tell you the screaming stops after midnight, that the halls go quiet, that everyone sleeps. They're lying. I've collected stories from nurses, orderlies, patients, and one security guard who quit after a single shift. What happens inside a psychiatric ward after the lights dim is something none of them have ever been able to fully explain. These are their accounts. My name is irrelevant. What matters is that I worked the overnight shift at a state psychiatric facility for almost 4 years. Ward C. Acute care. The kind of unit where patients aren't there because they're sad, they're there because something inside them has completely come apart. The first 3 months, I was terrified of the patients. By month 6, I wasn't scared of them at all. I was scared of room 11. Room 11 was at the end of the east corridor, the part of the hall where the overhead light had been flickering since before I started working there. Maintenance had replaced the bulb 7 times. 7 times. It always came back to that same slow, arrhythmic blinking. Like a pulse. The room itself wasn't special. Single occupancy, pale green walls, a narrow window with reinforced glass that looked out onto the parking lot. Standard issue everything. But every patient placed in room 11 without exception began making the same complaint within 48 hours of admission. Someone is standing in the corner. I want to be clear. I am not someone who believes in ghosts. I am a healthcare professional. I deal in vitals and medications and observable reality. So when the first patient, a woman in her 50s admitted for a severe depressive episode, told me there was a man standing in the far left corner of her room every night, I documented it as a symptom. Visual hallucination. Adjusted her meds. Moved on. Then the next patient said the same thing. A young man, early 20s, admitted after a psychotic break. Different diagnosis, different medications. Same corner. Same man. He doesn't do anything, he told me one night, his voice completely flat. He just watches. He's been there since 2 a.m. He watches me breathe. I checked the room. Of course, there was no one there. Over 18 months, 8 different patients occupied room 11. 8 different diagnoses. 8 different medication regimens. All 8 described the same figure. Male, tall, standing in the left corner facing the bed. Present only between 2 and 4 in the morning. Never speaking. Never moving. Just watching. The detail that undid me, the detail I couldn't rationalize away, was the hands. Every single patient, unprompted, without hearing the descriptions of the others, said the same thing about the hands. His arms are too long. His hands hang down past his knees. I started doing my 2 a.m. checks of room 11 from the doorway. I told myself it was efficiency. I wasn't fooling anyone, especially not myself. The last night I worked that unit, I was doing rounds at 2:17 a.m. Room 11 had a new patient, a middle-aged woman, admitted just 2 days prior. She'd been sleeping well, no reported disturbances. I came to her door, pushed it open an inch, and looked in. She was sitting up in bed, completely still, staring at the far left corner. Her hands were gripping the mattress edge so hard her knuckles were white. And she whispered not to me. She didn't even know I was there. She whispered, "Please just tell me what you want." I put in my transfer request the next morning. I told myself it was time for a change. I never went back to that corridor. And I never, ever looked up the room's history. Some things, you're better off not knowing. I was 23 when I took a job as a night shift intake coordinator at a private psychiatric facility. Fresh out of my psychology degree, optimistic in the way that only someone who's never actually worked in mental health can be. My job was simple: process paperwork, assist with voluntary admissions, answer the overnight phone line. Boring, mostly. Quiet. I liked quiet. Then they brought in the man I'll call Mr. Harlan. He was admitted on a Tuesday in late autumn, brought in by 2 family members who could barely make eye contact with him. He was calm, unnervingly calm. The kind of calm that isn't peace, but rather the stillness of something that has stopped pretending. Mid-60s, well-dressed, silver hair, soft-spoken. He sat across from me at the intake desk and answered every question politely and precisely. At the end of the intake form, I asked the standard final question. "Is there anything else you'd like us to know that might be relevant to your care?" He looked at me for a long moment. Really looked at me. The way people don't usually look at strangers. Then he said, "You have a photograph on your refrigerator. A lake. Mountains in the background. You've been meaning to take it down for a year because it makes you think of someone who hurt you. You should take it down. Tomorrow. Don't wait." I stopped typing. There was a photograph on my refrigerator. A lake. Mountains. A trip I'd taken with an ex-boyfriend who had, yes, hurt me very badly. I had been meaning to take it down. I thought about it nearly every morning. I have no idea how he could have known that. I smiled the professional smile they teach you and wrote, "Patient is communicative and oriented," on the intake form, and walked him to the admissions nurse. My hands were shaking the whole way. Over the following weeks, I heard things from the night staff. Mr. Harlan had made comments to a nurse about her brother's illness, an illness the nurse had never mentioned to anyone at the facility. He had told an orderly the exact date of a car accident the orderly had been in as a teenager. He had, allegedly, told a physician the name of the physician's deceased mother during an evaluation, unprompted. Everyone had a story. And everyone's story ended the same way. He looked at me like he could see something behind me. I avoided his wing. Easy enough to do in a large facility, especially at night. But one night, around 3 a.m., I had to deliver updated paperwork to the nursing station on his floor. I moved quickly, head down, professional. The corridor was dim, and the only sounds were the distant murmur of a TV from the common room and the hum of the ventilation system. I was almost past his room when the door, which should have been locked from the inside by the security mechanism, swung open 6 inches. He was standing right there in the gap, like he'd been waiting. "I know you've been avoiding me," he said quietly. "That's smart. But it doesn't matter. What's already in motion is already in motion." I said something like, "Sir, you need to go back to bed," in the flattest, calmest voice I could manage. He nodded slowly. And then he said, "Take the photograph down when you get home. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Before you sleep." I got the nurse. They got him back in the room. I filed a report about the door mechanism. I went home at 6 a.m. and took the photograph off the refrigerator. I don't know why. I just did. I quit 3 weeks later. I told myself it was the hours. I've never been able to explain Mr. Harlan. Not in any framework that makes sense. The simplest explanation is that he was a deeply perceptive man in the grip of a delusional episode who occasionally got lucky with details. I almost believe that. Almost. This is the story I don't tell at parties. I tell the funny ones, the patient who hoarded Jell-O cups for 3 weeks, the time someone released all the fish from the therapy aquarium. Those are the stories people want. This is not one of those stories. I was a psychiatric technician for 6 years at a county-run inpatient unit. Not glamorous work. 12-hour nights, rotating weekends, a salary that didn't reflect what you were actually doing, which was managing human beings in their most fractured states. You develop a thick skin. You develop compartmentalization skills that would impress a trauma surgeon. You get through your shift, and you go home, and you don't bring it with you. That's the theory. It was a Thursday night in early winter, and we were short-staffed as always when they brought in a teenage girl. I'll call her Mara. 16 years old, brought in by police after a neighbor called about sounds coming from the house. Her parents were traveling. She'd been alone for 3 days. She was, on the surface, composed. She sat in the intake chair with perfect posture and answered questions in a quiet, precise voice. No observable distress. Pupils normal, vitals stable, speech organized. She said she was fine. She said she was sorry for the trouble. But she wouldn't stop smiling. Not a happy smile. Not even a nervous smile. Just a fixed, small, entirely still smile that never moved while she talked. Like something had been drawn onto her face and then left there while the rest of her went somewhere else. The attending placed her on a 72-hour hold and assigned her to room 7. Routine precautionary. I walked her in, did the orientation, explained the call button, explained the schedule. She sat on the bed and folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with that smile. "You can go," she said. "I'll be completely quiet. I promise." And she was. For the first 4 hours, she was the quietest patient on the floor. Lights out at 10. Bed checks at 11, 12, 1. Each time I looked in, she was lying flat on her back, hands at her sides, eyes closed. Perfect stillness. At 3-4 a.m., every patient on the floor woke up. Not gradually. All at once. I heard the sounds begin simultaneously from multiple rooms, not screaming, just this low, formless sound of agitation, like the whole ward had the same nightmare. I was at the nursing station when it started, and I stood up and just listened, because in 6 years I had never heard anything like it. My colleague ran the hall check. Every other patient was awake. Most were sitting up in bed. None of them could articulate what was wrong. One elderly man kept saying something's in the walls. A woman in room 12 was rocking and repeating a word I couldn't make out. Room 7 was silent. I went to check on Mara. The observation window showed her still lying flat, perfectly still, hands at her sides. Same position as the last check. I watched her for a moment and was about to walk away when something registered. Her chest wasn't moving. I went in fast, hand already going for the call button. I touched her shoulder and she turned her head toward me with that smile still in place and said in a completely normal conversational voice, "Did I wake them?" I was trying to be so careful. She spent 4 more days on the unit. She was evaluated, stabilized, discharged to her parents. The clinical picture they documented was something I can look up in any textbook. A diagnosis, a treatment plan, a follow-up referral. Very clean. Very contained. But I've never been able to explain what happened at 3-4 a.m. I've never been able to explain why every patient on that floor woke at the same moment. And I've never been able to explain what she meant by, "I was trying to be so careful." Careful about what? That's the part I still think about. Careful. About what? I want to preface this by saying I worked security, not clinical staff. My job was perimeter checks, door logs, monitoring the camera feeds, and walking the halls 3 times per shift. I was not involved in patient care. I was there to make sure doors stayed closed and people stayed safe. I am telling you this because I need you to understand I was a professional and I was sober and I was paying attention. The facility was a private psychiatric hospital, older building, expanded in the 90s, the kind of place where old architecture and modern renovation coexist uneasily. There were sections of the building I was told were decommissioned old wards from before the renovations, and we were instructed not to enter them. No clinical reason given. Just, those wings are closed, don't go there. Fine. I didn't go there. For the first 5 months, nothing notable. I saw patients in distress. I supported staff during difficult situations. I did my rounds. The worst things that happened were predictable. An elopement attempt in February, a minor altercation in March. Normal incidents for a facility like this. Then summer arrived, and the camera in corridor B4 started malfunctioning. B4 was a connecting hallway between the main building and one of the decommissioned wings, a long, straight corridor with institutional tile floors and fluorescent lighting. The camera would simply stop, not go to static, not display an error message, just freeze on a still image of the empty hallway. Then, 10 to 40 minutes later, it would resume normal function, as if nothing had happened. Maintenance checked it 4 times. Found nothing wrong. The camera was functioning perfectly by every technical measure. The events that bothered me were simpler than you might expect. It wasn't that I saw anything on the camera. It was what I heard. During my rounds, passing through the main building, I would sometimes hear from the direction of the decommissioned wing footsteps. Clear, even, unhurried footsteps on hard floor. The cadence of someone doing exactly what I was doing. Walking a routine. Checking rooms. Making rounds. The first time, I radioed the desk and confirmed I was the only security personnel in the building. The desk confirmed it. I told myself It was sound traveling through the ventilation in a funny way. Old building, old ductwork. Fine. The third time it happened, I stood at the locked door to the decommissioned wing, and I listened, and the footsteps came down the hallway on the other side slowly, evenly, and stopped on the other side of that door. And then something knocked. 3 times. Slow. Deliberate. I called my supervisor. We did a sweep of the closed wing, both of us, flashlights, the whole thing. Empty rooms, old equipment under dust sheets, the smell of a space that hadn't been occupied in years. Nobody. Nothing. My supervisor laughed it off. Old buildings, he said. Pipes and pressure and settling. Sure. I requested a transfer to days 6 weeks later. I told HR it was a personal preference. It's been 2 years. I still sometimes think about those 3 knocks. Not frantic. Not random. Patterned. Patient. Like something that had all the time in the world and had decided finally that it was ready to be acknowledged. I've been a night shift psychiatric nurse for 11 years. I've seen things that would make most people faint. I say this not to brag. I say this so you understand that what I'm about to describe genuinely disturbed me, and I am not easily disturbed. The patient I'll call Donna had been with us for about 3 weeks when it started. 60 years old, admitted for a severe psychotic episode following a traumatic loss. She was progressing, medication was helping, she was eating, she was beginning to participate in group. She was the kind of patient you feel good about. But every night, without exception, she was awake at exactly 3:33 a.m. I mean exactly. I checked. I started documenting it after the first week. 3:33 a.m. Donna is seated upright in bed, awake and alert. Not distressed, not confused, not calling for staff. Just awake. Sitting there. Waiting. I asked her about it during a quiet night. Casual, just between us. I've noticed you tend to be awake in the middle of the night. Is something disturbing your sleep? She looked at me steadily and said, "She wakes me up." I asked who. Donna gestured toward the corner of the room, the corner by the door, and said very calmly, "The woman who sits there. She always comes at that time. She just sits and looks at me. I don't know what she wants, but she's very sad." I noted it in the chart. Visual and auditory hallucinations, I wrote. Consistent with her diagnosis. Spoke with attending re, possible medication adjustment. 3 nights later, I was doing my 3:30 check a little early. I was running ahead. I came to Donna's door and looked in through the observation window. The room was dark. Donna was asleep. But in the corner by the door, something was different. I cannot fully articulate what I saw. I want to be precise because I am a precise person. What I saw was a darkness that was darker than the surrounding dark. A shape seated in the corner. That's the only way I can describe it. Not a figure, not a person. A shape, a density. And then, at exactly 3:33 a.m., by the clock on my phone, Donna sat up. Whatever was in the corner, the shape, the darkness, whatever my rational mind cannot categorize, was gone by the time I pushed the door open and turned the light on. Of course it was. Donna looked at me with total calm and said, "She's here." I told the charge nurse I needed a break. I sat in the staff room for 15 minutes and thought very carefully about what I had and had not seen. I made decisions about how I would and would not interpret my own perceptions. Donna was discharged 2 weeks later, significantly improved. On her last night, she stopped me in the hall and took my hand in both of hers. "She won't come anymore," Donna said. "She just wanted someone to see her. She told me. She said thank you." I smiled and said I was glad she was feeling better. I walked back to the station. I wrote my notes. I finished my shift. I've never in 11 years requested a room change for a patient for non-clinical reasons. I never told anyone what I saw in that corner. I don't know what the right thing to do with an experience like that is. Some things in this job, you just carry. If you've worked in a place like this, if you have a story, you know the rule they don't teach you in any training. The ward doesn't empty after dark. It just gets quieter. And in the quiet things you can't explain, get louder. Sleep well.